We all have to admit something. We come to the Bible with preconceived, established convictions and conclusions. That's not all bad. It's not all bad at all. And I don't want to imply that from the beginning. We just have to admit it. So just like I'm wearing glasses right now that are shaping how I actually read, whether I see it or not, is very largely connected to how you interpret things. Your interpretation is your glasses. If you got the wrong ones on, you're seeing something, you're just seeing it skewed or different. So give you some examples. The Bible is true and can be trusted. All right. If I put that on and I say, okay, that's a conviction. It's true and can be trusted. Or I could do the reverse. I could say the Bible is full of error and it can't be trusted. So if I read like that, then I'm going to interpret like that. If I start with, let's be specific to Revelation. If I start with Revelation and say, I can understand this, I can, then that's an interpretation. Or if I start in the reverse, it's so complicated I'll never understand it, then that's how you're going to read it. Then we can be a little more broad. You can read Revelation to say what you want it to say. You want it to say something, so you read it till you get it to say that. Or you read it and you say, well, I think it means. Well, you can just be all over the place with that. And then we all have to admit we have influences. People who have influenced us in what we have read or heard or studied in the past as we approach Revelation. Now, if you've heard somebody teach on it or you've read anything about it, they were coming from one of the four dominant approaches or views to reading Revelation. So let me describe them for you. Number one, Revelation describes what happened in the first century. So that's an interpretive manner that Revelation describing what happened in the first century and it's fulfilled at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 67. This is called the Preterist approach. Number two, Revelation describes what will happen just before Jesus comes. So the entirety of the book is primarily describing what's going to happen just before he comes. This is called the Futurist approach. Number three, Revelation chronologically explains church history culminating in the second coming of Christ. So from chapter 6 through chapter 19, verse 11, Jesus coming on the white horse, it's a historicist approach, linear. Number four, Revelation depicts principles of the spiritual war that are repeated until Jesus comes. The spiritual war has been repeated in patterns that are seen in actual events and periods throughout human history. However, these descriptions are not necessarily specific one-time events. This is referred to most often as the idealist approach. Now, when you hear me describe those four things, you're likely doing some things in your own head. Well, I am, we'll pick one, a futurist, or I am definitely not a preterist. You may be going, I have no idea and I don't really know what you're talking about. Don't give up yet. Number three is you may be saying, I think I'm a little bit of maybe all of those things, or at least some of them. So what can we learn from the preterist? I think this is the one that most people just push back to right away and say, absolutely, this didn't all happen in the first century. But you at least have to connect to the 7 churches in the first century. They have to be taken into account because he is talking about 7 churches. But if you interpret all of the apocalyptic images as being fulfilled in the first century, then you're denying future predictions. Now, that doesn't mean, however, though, that when I'm reading Revelation, that I don't understand that the view of the beast was influencing people who read in the first century. The declaration in Revelation 1:3 that the time is near, and this is heavily influenced in the preterist approach, does not force you to say all these events have already happened. From the Futurists, what do we learn? That Revelation is looking primarily to the great event of Christ's coming. I think any normal person reading the book is going to see that that's a big deal and that's where it's pressing. However, if you interpret everything as happening just before Jesus comes, especially if you hold to a pre-tribulational rapture, then that allows you to read about something that has no bearing on your life. That you can just see this as something that's way out there, and it's not affecting me today. The historicist approach. This shares with the futurist to see the culmination of Christ's coming. And it shares with the preterist that it starts with the first 7 churches. But it is really difficult to make sense of the rest of the events in Revelation as happening in linear history. You've got to really force some things in history to make that fit. The idealist approach, the principles of Revelation, apply to the church at any time and any place. The example would be that what he wrote to the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3 apply to his church today. Now, if you're a futurist, you're going to say only one of those churches applies, and you may have heard it preached that way. The repeated statements in Revelation calling for you to persevere and to stay faithful, what do you do with those? Well, you at least have to say something's being said here. I want to quote Vern Porthras. And he says, quote, "We can sum up these insights in a single combined picture. The major symbols of Revelation represent a repeated pattern. This pattern has a realization in the first century situation of the 7 churches. It also has an embodiment in the final crisis, and it has an embodiment now. We pay special attention to the embodiment now because we must apply the lessons of Revelation to who we are." In other words, we're learning from all of them, but he's saying that primarily the approach he's taken, which I want to be clear, my primary approach to Revelation is an idealist approach. I am seeing these things as repeated patterns. I'm seeing these things as applying to us today. And you say, well, how'd you get there? Well, I got there, not immediately, but I got there by slowing down and reading the first 3 verses. Is why I slowed down and preached the first 3 verses to you. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy. If you stop right there, then you're either saying the prophecy's fulfilled or the prophecy is yet to be fulfilled. But if you keep reading, then you hear, blessed is the one who reads the words aloud of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. You're not just trying to find your place in history. You should read it and keep reading it and keep applying it to hear and keep what is written with the thought in your mind, the time is near. That is the imminent return of Jesus Christ, to which we say, Maranatha, come Lord Jesus.